What a wonderful beginning. Good evening.
Good evening.
Dowd, one of the ministers here at St. Aidan's. And on behalf of St. Aidan's and the Evolutionary Christianity team, we welcome you to session 2 of our part 1 of session 2.
Oh, right.
So we did all this last year, and here we are again this year. And I am just so thrilled and privileged to be welcoming you and to be welcoming Michael to our church. I will just give you a couple of housekeeping points, and then I will hand the mic over to Mark Green. We will be having some, Michael will be talking to us for a while, and then we will be at some point having a break, which Mark will talk about later, and then we will be breaking into small groups. Our break will be in the Great Hall, which is behind me. The washrooms are also through the Great Hall and to your left. So if there is anybody needing anything that you haven't heard about, I will be sitting in the corner here, so you can come and find me. And welcome once again, and I give you Mark Green first.
I guess I don't need this. Come on.
Good, thanks.
Am I live? No. Not yet? No, you're not. Testing 1, 2, 3. I'm on here. Testing 1, 2, 3. There we go. Well, as Betty Ann has said, we want to welcome you to this, the second of our series. And as you may know through the various pieces of publicity, we took quite seriously your feedback from last time. And while content you really appreciated, it was the sitting, having to just listen to audio that was hard. We're so used to, in this day and age, talking heads. And so we looked at ways to bring videos and those kind of things to you. And as we were looking for videos for Michael, we found out he was going to be in Seattle nearby the time we were beginning this. So we made contact with him, and he graciously agreed to travel up here. And so we're delighted that he's here. This series is another 4-week series, and we hope that you'll join us for all of them. They have caught the imagination of folks both within our denomination and beyond, as well as folks who perhaps have no connection with the church whatsoever and are wondering, you know, can there really be some salvation for this poor, tired old thing that we call Christianity some days? And so this is our attempt to begin to look seriously at the way in which science and religion bridges itself. So that's one of the purposes of this series. And the other one is that we want to begin to link ourselves one to another and to move out of sometimes of silo mentality that we have, where this church does this stuff and this church over here does this stuff, and we feel like we're sometimes competing with each other rather than working together. And since we are part of one great family, this is part of our goal in this series, to begin to bridge those things together. Our schedule for tonight is a little bit different than what the schedule will be most nights. This evening, because we've got Michael with us, it seemed foolish to use our standard kind of format and not make the most use that we could of Michael's time. And so Michael will talk for about an hour, and then there'll be some question and answer period that he'll facilitate, and then some concluding comments, and he's got a video clip that he wants to wind up with. So you're going to be here for a little bit of time. If sitting in these pews is uncomfortable and hard for you, please feel free to get up, move to the edges, and stand, rock your body, whatever helps you to listen. It's not meant to be torture time, and that's not Michael's intent either. At 9 o'clock we'll head, as Betty Ann said, for our refreshment break. And then you'll find some small groups and people that say facilitator on them sitting in those small groups. We invite you to join them for just about 15 minutes tonight. It's kind of a beginning to reflect on a little bit of your first impressions. And it could be that you're so inspired that you're going to head out here to your local Starbucks or to your local beer parlor or wherever it is that tickles your fancy and continue the conversation more. And you know what? That would for us be the greatest sign of success, that you kept talking some more, and that's really what we want to see happen. We have some norms of what it means to do this work together, And it's important for me to tell you that the exchange of ideas and perspectives requires a safety to be able to question and to doubt and to debate and explore. And so this needs to be a time and a space over these 4 sessions to do just that. Secondly, all perspectives are valued and may be questioned. Just because you have a perspective and you offer it does not mean it's gospel. And everyone else in the group is welcome to question. And in fact, number 3, to disagree with another person's perspective is healthy and encouraged. Okay? It makes for a very boring discussion group if we all sit and nod politely at each other. But to disagree means to disagree with an idea, not with the personhood of the person sharing the ideas. And so your disagreement needs to not attack them, but rather dispute the merits of the ideas. And finally, airtime in small groups is to be equally shared among all. Okay? It's great that you've come and read everything that Michael's ever done, but that doesn't make you the expert. All right. We begin. We heard the song with an acknowledgement that we are a part of something much greater. On Sunday, we had the privilege of having Michael's partner, Connie, with us, and she talked with the children about stardust and the way in which all of us are part of this unfolding universe from its very beginning. And that light, that expansion, is sometimes a metaphor we use to talk about the sacred or holy. And so we light a candle this day and remind ourselves that in this place and in this presence, mostly because you are here amongst us, that we acknowledge that the light dwells among us. In the unfolding of the cosmos and our sense of being, let us stand and sing together. And so without further ado, I'd like to invite and welcome Michael. Michael Dowd comes to us from being on the road. At one point we were trying to figure out how to get him some information, some money. And someone said, well, couldn't we just mail it to him? I said, well, not easily. He's been on the road for 10 years. And so Michael and Connie have been on the road for 10 years, and they've done presentations for different community groups over 1,700 times. And so he's no slouch at this. And, we're not just, though, simply another notch in his belt. Michael trained with an undergraduate degree in philosophy and then went on to do graduate work in theology. His ministry and time with the Christian church spanned all sorts of denominational perspectives, and he's kind of been the whole gamut. His absorption of science and its intersection over the years, and with his partner Connie, who is a science writer, has radically changed both his life and his ministry, and is calling it a sense of where he needs to be. And he's going to tell you more about that himself in a few minutes. But what I want you to know is that this is just a taste of his commitment to trying to engage that exciting junction between science and religion and the way in which they really inform one another and open up mystery. You can deepen your experience of that by reading more and by engaging with some of the DVDs. And those are for sale both at the back and in the large room where there is coffee time. And we would encourage you to do that and to look for ways to, through this series and other ways, to continue to be in dialogue. You'll see that this series is being videotaped. We know that some folks wanted to be here tonight but could not. Or you may find that there's so much happening what Michael has to say now you want to see it again. So it will be posted on the Evolutionary Christianity website. That's just linked to the First Net website. And it may take us a day or two to get it edited and up there. But know that indeed it will be there. And so without further ado, welcome, Michael.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, Matt. What a great turnout. Thank you all who organized and went into this amazing series. When Mark first approached me, he said that I asked him, I gave him a whole host of topics, and he actually said, well, we want something a little different than what you've done before. We like that Tina Turner song, you know, and we wondered if you could do something on what's God got to do with it. So I had some fun. What's God got to do with it? What's God but an ancient mythic notion? What's God got to do with it? Who needs Poseidon? Plate tectonics made the ocean. Now, during the Q&A time, I want to come back to sort of talk of God talk. We're going to talk a lot about God and reality, but I want to come back to this, so hold that thought. Everything that Connie and I do is about helping us to be in right relationship to reality. I would say that right relationship to reality is a secular way of saying getting right with God. And I think the most important face of reality to be in right relationship to is the future. Besides, I like to show a picture of my 1.5-year-old granddaughter. So this program is dedicated to Isla Renee and her generation. Loyal Rue is a philosopher of religion, and he's got this great quote. He wrote a book called Religion is Not About God. And what he means is that religion is about our relationship to reality. And yes, reality has often been personified as the various gods and goddesses, but it's really about our relationship to reality at all scales. And he's got this wonderful quote. He says, the most profound insight in the history of humanity is that we should seek to live in accord with reality. Indeed, living in harmony with reality may be accepted as a formal definition of wisdom. If we live at odds with reality, foolishly, then we will be doomed. But if we live in proper relationship with reality wisely, then we will be saved. Now he goes on to say that every culture and throughout all time, they've had at least a tacit understanding of this fundamental principle. But what we're less in agreement about is how we should think about reality and what we should do to put ourselves into harmony with it. But that makes a lot of sense if you remember that these two questions, which are the two fundamental questions that all cultures at all times need to address. What's real and what's important? Or how things are and which things matter. But these questions would have been answered differently at different times in history and different places around the world. I mean, reality is very different in a desert than it is in the jungle, or 50,000 years ago, or 50 years ago. And so I like this analogy of the 5 blind men and the elephant. You know, it's like if these were 5 blind men that were experiencing a different aspect of reality, a different aspect of the elephant, if these were 5 different theologians, you'd have 5 radically different theologies. And religious differences are not a whole lot more complex than that. Reality at this scale is very different. What happens is we see this complexity in evolution. We find greater cooperation over time. We keep finding ways of cooperating at larger and at wider scale. This is how the world has become as complex as it is now. But what we now need is global collective intelligence. Tribal collective intelligence will not serve. Regional collective intelligence will not serve. I mean, it serves to some degree, but what we now need is global answers to these questions. And that's what science is. You don't understand science if you think it's just another language game. It reflects humanity's global collective intelligence. I mean, have any of you seen this image? This is one of my favorite images of all time. This is an uncolored, touched-up photo from the Cassini mission. We sent a spaceship on the other side of Saturn looking back towards the Earth and towards the Sun. The Sun is directly behind Saturn. This is a solar eclipse. You can see a little piece of the Sun right there. And you know what that little dot is right there? Planet Earth. We're looking through the rings of Saturn and able to see Earth in the distance. This is a little bit further out. This is Andromeda Galaxy. This is 2 million light years away. That is, we're seeing Andromeda not as it is now, but as it was 2 million years ago. Because it's taken light traveling 11 million miles a minute, 2 million years to reach our eyes, or our telescopes. And this is our closest neighbor. This is the Hubble, what they're calling the extreme deep field. This is the most recent image from the Hubble Space Telescope. This is a dot, this is a star in the Milky Way, but every other dot, no matter how large, no matter how small, are all galaxies. And it reflects just a teeny, teeny bit of the sky. So the question then becomes, okay, we talked about science as humanity's collective intelligence. What is religion? Is religion merely supernatural otherworldlyism? Like, is that all religion is? I suggest to you, no. Religions are mythic maps. Oh, by the way, this is me at the bottom of Deer Creek Falls in the Grand Canyon. This actually goes up 150 feet in the Grand Canyon. And Connie took the picture with no color touch-up. It's amazing. But religions are mythic maps of what's real and what's important, that all produce personal wholeness and social coherence. There's not a religion in the world that doesn't produce personal wholeness and social coherence by providing a map, a mythic map of what's real and what's important, and that provide consistent access to the feeling states that humans have always needed to thrive. Human beings don't thrive if all we can do is look to the future with fear. We do thrive when we can look to the future with trust. We don't thrive if all we can do is look to the past with resentment or guilt. We do thrive when we can look to the past with gratitude. In fact, that's part of what therapy is about, is helping people re-story their past to find something to be grateful for from what they previously simply felt guilty about or ashamed about or had judgment about. And then, of course, we don't thrive if we're overwhelmed with the challenges of the moment or the day. We do thrive when we're inspired to be in action, whatever the challenges may be. Because as we all know, compost happens. You know? Life just sometimes throws us a pile of junk to deal with. So how do we stay inspired to be in action? Well, all human cultures have provided beliefs that got people here. Every culture has beliefs that get you to these fundamental feeling states that we've always needed to thrive. Only recently do we now have knowledge that can get us here, but not at the expense of religion, in a way that's helping the religious traditions themselves to evolve. If we think that the Bible provides a more accurate map of what's real and what's important than scientific, historic, and cross-cultural evidence do, we will necessarily trivialize God, guidance, and good news. More tragically still, we will be utterly blind and deaf to what God is saying, doing, and revealing today. I would suggest that much of the church is autistic to what God's revealing today because we have an inadequate, outdated understanding or a GPS of what's real and what's important, and we think that our best guidance comes from ancient texts rather than current evidence, divine revelation. St. Thomas Aquinas said it 750 years ago. He said, a mistake about creation will necessarily result in a mistake about God. Now, if that's true, what it means, among other things, is the more we learn about the universe, the more we learn about creation, if we're not updating what we mean when we use the word God, we may have definitions and understandings of God that are woefully outdated. I mean, if you take a straightforward reading of the morality of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, you could say that it's summed up in this statement: obey the Lord or die. In the New Testament, it's believe in Jesus or fry. I'm talking about a literalistic perspective. And yet, the United States Department of Defense definition of terrorism is this: the calculated use of violence or the threat of violence to inculcate fear, intended to coerce or intimidate others in the pursuit of goals that are generally religious, political, or ideological. Now, we all know God can't possibly be a cosmic terrorist. And yet this is what biblical literalism leads us to. It's one of the reasons why P.Z. Myers, he's one of the world's most widely read science bloggers. 60,000 people every day read his blog. He's a very atheist. This is a direct quote. He says, there's no surer way to make an atheist than to get them to actually read Scripture. This is what he's pointing to. Anytime the Bible or the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or any sacred text says God said this or God did that, what follows is always an interpretation. It's an interpretation of what some person or group of people thought or felt or sensed that reality was saying or doing. And almost always is justification after the fact or to make a theological point. And if we fail to understand this, we belittle the very notion of God, and we're surely going to miss what reality is up to today. What I'm going to suggest, and I want to say this, that this is simply the Christian naturalism version of evolutionary Christianity. As many of you know, I interviewed 38 of the world's leading theologians and scientists on this topic of evolutionary Christianity. And so I don't pretend to say this is the only way to think about evolutionary Christianity, what I'm offering tonight. Because there's a wide diversity. Bruce Sanguin was here recently, and Bruce Sanguin and I are dear brothers. I love that man, and he loves me. And yet we don't share identically the same worldview. There's a lot of overlap, but we have some differences. Those differences are a healthy thing. I just want to put that caveat out there. I'm sort of on the radical edge, let's just say it that way. So what I'm going to suggest is that we are in the early stages of what will be seen historically as the evidential Reformation. And what I mean by that is that we are, where our primary authority is for what's real and what's important isn't the Catholic hierarchy, it's not just the Bible, it's all forms of evidence. And specifically, when we have our best evidential understanding of these three things: big history, human nature, and death. And only when we have our best scientific understanding of these three things will we have an undeniably real concept of God, or an undeniably real concept of God. We'll come back to that slide toward the end. Now, just a little background for those of you that don't know us. Connie, my wife, who's standing back there in the back, Connie is a science writer. She's written 4 science books. From Gaia to Selfish Genes and Evolution Extended are both MIT Press books. The Ghost of Evolution was Amazon.com's top recommended science book for 3 months when it came out in 2001. And Green Space, Green Time is really the spirituality of science. It's how the ecological and evolutionary sciences can enrich your communion with the whole of reality. It's one of the leading books in what's called religious naturalism. My background is in Christian ministry. I've pastored 3 churches over the course of a decade. And then I've also done sustainability education and personal empowerment work over the course of about 6 years. And I've written 2 books, Thank God for Evolution and Earth Spirit. In fact, I couldn't believe it. Y'all have Earth Spirit in the church library here. It's like, it was written in 1990. It was like, wow, that's cool. We've been on the road, as Mark said, for 10 years now. Here you can see the side of our van. We've got the Jesus and Darwin fish kissing with hearts between them, and it definitely gets us some interesting looks in conservative parts of the world. Here we are in front of the Creation Museum. You know the museum south of Cincinnati where they believe that the dinosaurs were with Noah on Noah's Ark? They had a security guard watch us for 2.5 hours. You don't know about these radical evolutionaries. We've spoken to about 1,700 groups, and they break down into 3 radically different populations. And even though these 3 populations really don't have anything in common in terms of their basic worldview, their philosophical or metaphysical worldview, the same sacred science, the same inspiring evidential worldview works for all of these. There's a distinction that my friend David Sloan Wilson makes between practical truth and factual truth, which is a vital distinction. I'm going to offer 3 distinctions that are really at the heart of what I see as Christian naturalism or evolutionary Christianity in terms of this form of it. No religion in the world is factually true. The distinction of fact has only existed for about 500 years. But almost by definition, every religion that's existed for any length of time is practically true. That is, if you act as if it's true, you'll experience personal wholeness and social coherence. And you'll get those feeling states that we talked about earlier. Now, another distinction that I make is the distinction between public revelation and private revelation. Private revelation is an insight that comes to one individual who then has to share it with others, and others then believe it or not. Private revelation necessarily produces believers or unbelievers. But public revelation is what's being revealed to the entire human community. It sometimes is introduced in terms of private revelation. You know, Einstein has a vision of riding a beam of light. That's a private revelation. But then he publishes a paper and the whole scientific community goes to work trying to disprove it. The skeptical scientific method is all about discerning, is this truth claim true because it's evidentially true? In other words, is it true in a way that Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Jews, and atheists can all agree it's true? Or is it merely said to be true because some charismatic or authoritative person said it, or because it's been passed down for so many generations by tradition that we assume it must be true? And public revelation isn't better than private revelation, but it's almost always more widely useful. More people can agree on the nature of reality thanks to public revelation. The last distinction that I want to share is the distinction between day language and night language. Day language reflecting our daytime experience, night language reflecting our nighttime experience. And we do things at night in our dreams, for example, that we can't do during the day. But when you fly in your dreams, you're not having a supernatural experience. You're having an experience common to the dream state. Day language is what's so. It's the facts. It's what's objectively real. It's factually true, publicly, measurably true. Night language is what does it mean? It's the interpretation. It's what's subjectively real. It's practically true. And both of these are necessary in the same way that daytime and nighttime experience are both necessary. I mean, did you know that if you keep any mammal from dreaming, it will die? Mammals must dream. There's something about the dream state. We mammals have to dream or we'll die. And yet we dream in a whole different reality than we do during the day. In fact, a woman about 6 or 7 years ago came up to Connie after one of her programs and said that she had, just a few nights earlier, had been reading to her 5-year-old daughter at bedtime, and she decided that she was going to try to read some nonfiction at bedtime. And she said, within 20 seconds, she said, my daughter stopped me and said, no, 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 Mommy, that's a daytime book. Read me a nighttime book, Mommy. Out of the mouths of babes. God didn't stop revealing truth vital to human well-being back when people believed the world was flat and religious insights were recorded on animal skins. God has been faithfully revealing truth. That is, reality has been revealing itself faithfully. In fact, I say it this way, facts are God's native tongue. I mean, if you lived, let's say you lived 500 years ago in the state of Washington, and there was, which is where this picture was taken, and there was this huge boulder in the middle of a field 500 years ago. What would you and your culture say about how that boulder got there? You would have had to have some story. Anything this weird or this cool demands a story, an explanation. And my hunch is that God did it probably would have been the way most cultures would have talked about it. Now, there would have been different stories. God dropped it from the sky, or God brought it in on a chariot, or whatever. But God did it would have been the way that most people talked about that. But then in the 1920s, J. Harlan Bretz would propose these great Missoula floods, and now there's not a geologist in the world that would debate how this got there. What happened was these huge floods occurred. These lakes would fill up about the size of one of the Great Lakes. It would break the dam, and icebergs carrying these boulders would drop them all throughout Washington and then go to the Pacific Ocean by the Columbian Gorge. So, God did it. Sounds like a supernatural explanation. Geology did it. Sounds like a natural explanation. But I suggest to you, no, these are day and night language ways of saying the same thing. The words God and evolution are pointing to the same divine creative process. Both answer the question, how did we get here? One uses the night language of religion, the other the day language of science. Arguing whether it was God or evolution that created everything is like debating whether it was me or my vocal cords that produced this sentence. Or like quarreling over whether it was Gaia or plate tectonics that created the oceans and the mountains. Such silly and largely unnecessary confusion will remain the norm until we distinguish and value day and night language, factual and practical truth, and public and private revelation. This is one of the most important slides I'm going to show tonight. So let's take a quick look at big history, human nature, and death. And what I'm suggesting is that this gives us an undeniably real understanding of God, and I'm also going to suggest that this gives us a hopeful way of thinking about the future for ourselves and collectively. First of all, there's an academic discipline now called big history, which has existed for about 23, 24 years, which is basically the history of everyone and everything. It's physical evolution, that is the evolution of galaxies, biological evolution, the evolution of life, and cultural evolution, human evolution, as one modern-day creation story. It's our very first, humanity's very first evidence-based creation story. And there are thresholds of complexity that suggest a trajectory. In fact, Bill Gates, David Christian has a TED Talk, I mean not a TED Talk, that was his TED Talk, but he has a teaching company. Those of you that may be familiar with the teaching company, the Great Courses, he has a 48 half-hour lecture series that is a course on big history, and Connie and I watched it, and we felt that it was the single best educational experience we've ever had in our lives. Well, it's kind of cool when the richest man in the world agrees with you. Bill Gates says, I'm a power consumer of instructional videos, DVDs, and downloads on a wide range of subjects. But my favorite course of all time is called Big History, taught by David Christian. I wish everyone could take this course. Big History literally tells the story of the universe, from the very beginning to the complex societies we have today. It shows how everything is connected to everything else. It weaves together insights and evidence from astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, anthropology, history, economics, and more. We aim to make this great story curriculum freely available online to high school students throughout the world. And that's what the Big History Project is all about. Yes, I would love some water. Thanks, Don. Now, when I talk about the trajectory of big history, the way I often speak about it is nested emergence. Nested emergence. Thanks, Tom. nested like nesting dolls, because one of the fundamental truths that we now understand about the nature of reality, that there's no disagreement about, is the nested nature of creativity. Subatomic particles are within atoms, within molecules, within cells, within organisms, within planets, within galaxies. Those at all nested levels, every level can create. Every level can bring something new into existence that didn't exist before. Stars are creative. They create the periodic table of elements. But molecules are also creative. Hydrogen, oxygen comes together, water is created. So creativity exists at all nested levels. And from this perspective, God or the goddess or Allah or any sacred name for reality as a whole is just that, is a personification of that one and only creative reality that includes it all yet also transcends it all. Here I've got the nested all separated out, but in reality they're all nested inside of each other. And prayer, from this perspective, isn't petitioning a divine being who's out there somewhere to miraculously intervene according to what I'm praying for. Prayer is like a cell in the body in communion with the very body of which it's a part. It's just much more of an intimate notion of prayer. Here's a look at this greater complexity, greater interdependence. This is the nested emergence part. Greater complexity, interdependence, and cooperation at wider scale, emerging over time in the pre-human world and in the human world. And there's no scientist in the world that would say that this came before this, or this came before this, or this came before this. Human cooperation once existed only within small family groups. Cooperative organizations expanded to produce multi-family bands, then tribes, then agricultural villages, cities, and empires, then nation-states. Now, some forms of economic and social cooperation span the globe. So let's take a look. Okay, that's a quick and dirty look at big history. What do we know about human nature? What I'm going to suggest is there's 5 things that we know about human nature. There's just no debate about it. Or at least the last one was a little controversial, but I think you'll probably agree that the way that I'm framing this, that's true for that too. The first is that we're not separate from the universe and the earth. That we're hardwired for empathy and cooperation, but only with the in-group. That's why it's so important how we define the in-group. We are meaning makers, and we're also self-deceivers. This is where it gets pretty interesting. Our deepest drives, our deepest instincts are mismatched. We have mismatched instincts, and we live in a world of supernormal allurements. I'll be spending the bulk of time talking about that. And our natural destiny is everlasting death. I'm not talking about whatever happens to soul or spirit or consciousness. I'm talking about from the perspective of every life form in the universe, when we die, we are everlastingly dead. And we can embrace this and not be afraid of this when we have sacred, meaningful, what God's been revealing through science about death. So let's take a look at these. The idea that we are not separate from the universe and the earth, the 2 main thinkers that have furthered this is Pierre Desjardins and Julian Huxley. Pierre Desjardins wrote The Phenomenon of Man, or the human phenomenon. Julian Huxley was one of the founders of the American Humanist Society. And here you have a theist, a Jesuit paleontologist and Catholic priest, and an atheist, who were actually, they both shared pretty much the same worldview. That's why theism and atheism are outdated concepts. I'll come back to that. But here you've got both of them have this understanding that we are not separate from the universe, that the universe has been expanding for 14 billion years, and we are that process becoming aware of itself. The universe as a whole has gone from simple atoms to more complex atoms, to molecules, to more complex molecules, to creatures, to more complex creatures, to societies, to more complex societies. And we are that process becoming aware of itself. Brian Swim is a professor of cosmology and has got these 2 great quotes. He says, 4 billion years ago, the earth was molten rock, and now it sings opera. Right? Earth was once molten rock, now it sings opera. And see, nobody put anything here. When the Bible speaks about God forming us from the dust of the ground, breathing into us the breath of life. That's a true story. It's a night language or mythic way of describing the fact that we go out of the dynamics of the planet itself, and it's God, it's reality as a whole that makes that possible. I'm not sure how Moses could have said it in any other way, so he wrote that. Now here's another quote from Brian Swingle that's a little bit more audacious. He tries to take the entire history of the universe and sum it up in 2 sentences. I think you'll like it. He says, you take a great cloud of hydrogen gas and you just leave it alone. And it becomes rose bushes, giraffes, and human beings. Now, that is such a better story than Genesis. And it is equally divine revelation. That's my point. Now, to talk about us as being hardwired for empathy and cooperation, only within group, is to say that we are social animals. We are group animals. We have social instincts. Relationships are us. And see, this is where, because we are group animals, this is where love and kindness and care and consideration, all the pro-social feelings and the pro-social behaviors emerge because of our group nature. Anybody who tells you that evolution just says we're all selfish doesn't understand this essential aspect of evolution. Now, to talk about us as meaning makers is to say that we are inherent storytellers. We're always interpreting. We can't not interpret. We have self-deceptive instincts. That is, if you put cognitive biases in Google, you'll get the Wikipedia page that'll show all the different ways that we are programmed to deceive ourselves. That's why integrity is not a solo sport. It's a team sport. We need each other. That's why the scientific community is always trying to disprove each other. Because we need that. Because scientists are just as prone to self-deception as anybody else. We don't experience reality as it is. We experience reality through the lens of our interpretation. And we use night language to interpret. There has never been a time in the history of the universe that the word God has been used that it hasn't been an interpretation. The word God is not a description, it's an interpretation. Now here's where it really gets fun and interesting. This is what I'm going to spend the bulk of my time on. Is that we have mismatched instincts in a world of supernormal allurements. To talk about, by the way, Connie did not take this picture. She took almost all the others except the galaxy shots and stuff. But I got this one on the internet. So we struggle, and if you only remember 2 things about this segment of my program, please remember these 2 things. Mismatched instincts and supernormal allurements. Mismatched instincts and supernormal allurements. So let's take a quick look at these. By the way, I'm going to zip through this. If you want a more thorough, in-depth version, I did a TED Talk on this topic. Just put Michael Dowd TED and you get there. Understanding the fact that our instincts don't match this world we today have to live in. Our instincts match a world in which our ancestors used to live in and help them to survive and reproduce in that kind of a world. But our instincts, ever since the agricultural revolution, our instincts have been more and more mismatched. So over the course of the last 10,000 years, our instincts keep getting further and further mismatched for today's conditions. And understanding that mismatch can go a long way towards helping us to understand some of the things that we find challenging and problematic about ourselves and each other. Now, to talk about supernormal allurements, there was a book that came out 2 years ago by Deirdre Barrett called Supernormal Stimuli, How Primal Urges Overran Their Evolutionary Purpose. Because, folks, in case it's not obvious, this is not food. You'll never find anything like that in the natural world. This is a concentration of food-like items that we are programmed to pay attention to and to want more of. In fact, Deirdre Barrett says almost everyone will overeat if dining on supernormal stimuli. They've taken birds, when you replace its normal egg with an egg that's ceramic or wooden, if it's a little bit larger or brighter color or more pronounced markings, the bird will always sit on a fake egg. It will ignore its own eggs will die, and it never learns. It's super normal of a woman. Bees will become addicted to company. Roundworms will become addicted to nicotine. The most dangerous aspect of our modern diet arises from our ability to refine food. This is a link to drug, alcohol, and tobacco addictions. Coca doesn't give South American Indians health problems when they brew or chew it. No one chewing is like eating poppy seeds. When grapes and grains were fermented lightly and occasionally they presented a healthy pleasure, not a hazard. Salt, fat, sugar, and starch are not harmful in their natural contexts. It's our modern ability to concentrate things like cocaine, heroin, alcohol, and food components that turns them into a mess that our bodies are hardwired to crave. I mean, think about it. What was there to be addicted 10,000 years ago? Were you going to run into some fermented berries? Hard liquor wasn't even invented until 300 years ago. And yet today, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, video games, shopping, internet porn, romance novels, social networking sites, news, and so much more that our ancestors never had to deal with. And these are like a larger egg. I don't know if the international version of Newsweek, the American version of Newsweek, just 2 months ago, had eye crazy, panic, depression, psychosis, how connectivity addiction is rewiring our brains. Connie and I just listened to a book that this article was based on called Eye Disorder. He talks about 13 different diagnostic mental illnesses that are all being either caused or exacerbated because of the explosion of technologies like Twitter and Facebook and texting and smartphones and just everything, even email. I shared this with the group, the small group this morning, but I'm going to share this with everybody. And it's going to be a little bit startling, but it's the truth. We learned this from Gary Wilson, who did a TED Talk called The Great Porn Experiment. The average age of a boy who starts seeking out porn online is the age of 8. By the time they're 11 or 12, almost all boys are masturbating to porn regularly, even if they haven't reached puberty. By the time they're 18 to 22, there's an epidemic of erectile dysfunction. Young boys who can't get it up without porn for the first time in the history of humanity as teenagers not been able to do it. And Viagra doesn't help because it's not physiological. The problem is in here. They tried to find a control group. They couldn't find one. They couldn't find teenage boys anywhere in the world other than maybe Amish kids that weren't regularly using porn. And it's impacted because they have no way of relating to girls who want to do things like talk or cuddle. And it's not just affecting the boys. I talked to my son's girlfriend who's 25. She said when she started becoming sexually active at the age of 19, she said the boys were trying to do to her, and that's the way she framed it, what they were learning on the porn, and it was painful. So she had to get drunk first. And then she said, realize this is a dead-end street. So she started dating guys twice her age, those in their late 30s and 40s. This is a huge, the Chinese government is investing tens of millions of dollars to try to figure out what to do with this. Now, I don't want to leave you with bad news, because there is good news here. And one of the things that's good news is that we can recognize that we all have inherited proclivities. We all have an unchosen nature. And the interesting thing is what this does is it allows us to honor reality. Remember I talked about getting right with God as having the right relationship to reality? Well, no Christian, Muslim, or Jew that I've ever met that's a pre-evolutionary Christian, Muslim, or Jew is genuinely grateful for their sinful nature. The traditional story doesn't get us gratitude. You know, we get grateful for Jesus, but we don't get grateful for our sinful nature. And yet what we now have is this understanding that if our ancestors didn't have the the very same instincts that we and our children and grandchildren sometimes find challenging, we wouldn't even be alive. Let me say that again. If your ancestors didn't have the same instincts that you and your loved ones sometimes find challenging, you wouldn't even be alive. And having that honorable stance, that gratitude stance, can be utterly transforming because it allows us to cherish the fact that we all have an unchosen nature. We all have inherited proclivities. That is, we have aspects of ourselves that we can choose who were born this way for really, really good reasons. For example, we all have cravings for sugar, salts, and fats. Why is it? Oh, thank you. Here, Mark, you got to fix it. You got to I'm sorry about that. Great, thanks. Well, we all have cravings for sugar, salts, and fats for the very simple reason that for 99% of human history, it wasn't easy to find sugar, salts, and fats. So having a craving for them allowed our ancestors to survive long enough to reproduce. Yet today, we are surrounded. In fact, you can't avoid being around foods that have sugar, salts, and fats. Yet we still have the cravings as though they were rare. There's a mismatch. None of us in this room, there's not a single person in this room that would be alive today if some of our ancestors weren't really, really good at putting on weight. See, that's what stored energy is. Fat is stored energy so that we can survive the harsh winters, the droughts, the lean times. In fact, human beings that couldn't do that got lost to the gene pool. And our ancestors were so generous, they passed those genes on to us. It's our unchosen nature. Testosterone. One of the things we know about human nature now is that this is a human universal. In all men and all women, the higher the testosterone, the more people take risks, and the more people think about sex. In fact, you can take people that are risk averse. They never think about, and they never think about sex. You give them testosterone, they're going to have sex on the brain, and they're going to take all kinds of risks. In fact, Connie and I were at the home of a woman and her husband in the San Francisco Bay Area a few years ago. And she said that her doctor several years earlier had put her on testosterone patches. And she said after 2 days, she said, I couldn't stop thinking about sex. She said, is this what guys have to deal with? Well, the answer is yes, it is actually. But it's not just guys. See, women also have testosterone, and some women have a lot more of it than others. Now, men typically have 10 to 20 times the testosterone. Could you turn this down, please? Men typically have 10 to 20 times the testosterone that women do. But some women have a lot of testosterone. In fact, my daughter is life's ever-present reminder to me that there's a wisdom larger than my ego at work. I was a peace activist for much of my adult life. Take a guess at what my oldest daughter does in the world. Yeah, she's a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. Not only that, but my daughter is one of the first women in U.S. history to be in the all-Marine wrestling team. That's right, my daughter wrestles for the Marine Corps and kicks butt. And her pacifist daddy is so damn proud of her. Now, here's the interesting thing, though, is that there was a man who came up to me at the end of one of my programs in Florida. And he told me he had a life-changing experience because I talked about the brain science and the mismatched instincts. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, Michael, you just made sense of something that happened to me, you know, I think he said 35 years ago. He said that I haven't told anybody about. He was 81 years old. He comes up to me, he says, Michael, he said, I got to tell you something I've never told anybody. Now, I don't know about you, but when somebody who's 80 years old is going to tell me something they've never told anybody, I'm all ears. Right? I said, please tell me. He said, in 1973, he said, I became the vice president of my corporation. See, this is the thing. The higher the status, the more testosterone. If somebody gets elected into public office, or they become ordained, or become a vice president of their corporation, or in any way where people are admiring you and looking up to you, testosterone levels go through the roof, right? And it's not because your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother ate an apple. Right? And so this guy said that he felt this freedom by hearing my message because he realized that he had no idea what was going on. And the amazing thing was, the guilt and the shame was so gone that between Sunday morning, which is when I did the sermon, and then Tuesday night, which is when I did an evening program, he called his ex-wife. Because what happened was, he said, I'd been married for 13 years, he said. He said, and I had never betrayed my wife. He said, but within 6 months of my promotion, he became the vice president of a huge corporation. He said, within 6 months of my promotion, he said, I had 5 affairs. None of them knew about each other. He said, my wife didn't know about any of them. He said, it ultimately cost me my marriage. It cost me my job. And he said, I've been living with the guilt and the shame of this for 35 years. He said, I haven't told anybody, even a therapist. I'm telling you right now. And the amazing thing was, he then, between the time that I did the sermon and Tuesday night, he called his ex-wife. He hadn't talked to her in 9 years. And he said he apologized for being such a deceptive, lying sack, came back to integrity. To use Christian night language, he came back to Christ. He came back to integrity. And I found out 3 months later from his roommate that his depression of the last 15 years had lifted. He wasn't even on the medication anymore. Now, he wasn't a Christian. He was a humanist. He was an atheist. He said, but this was at a Unitarian Universalist church. He said, but it feels like I've got a new lease on life. He said, it feels like I've had a born-again experience, and here I am, 81 years old. This perspective naturalizes, it realizes ancient night language, such as the fall of Adam and Eve and original sin. For example, prior to microscopes, before we could even see bacteria, before we even knew bacteria existed, it wasn't just difficult to understand infection, it was completely impossible to understand infection. Prior to telescopes, before we could even see other galaxies, when we thought that the whole universe was the Milky Way, it wasn't just difficult to understand the large-scale structure of the universe, it was completely impossible. Well, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, it wasn't difficult to understand our evolved brain, it was utterly impossible. But what you would have known, had you been paying close attention, is what we all know through our experience, which is we all say, I'll do that, but we don't. We say, oh, I'll never do that, but we do. We say, you can count on me for that, but you couldn't. Now, what's that about? Well, the fall of Adam and Eve, original sin, are spot on, accurate night language about what we can now speak about in a natural, factual, day language way. I mean, in our tradition, the Christian tradition, I'm assuming most of us are Christians here, nobody said it better than the Apostle Paul. He said, I'm a slave to sin. I really don't understand myself. I have the desire to do what is good, but I don't do it. What I end up doing is not the good I want to do, but what I hate to do. What a wretched man am I. I believe that history will show that the greatest psychological and spiritual revelation or realization of the 20th century was the discovery that human beings have powerful, indeed compelling instincts, just like all other animals do. And that if we don't understand, appreciate, and respectfully manage, that is, honor and harness our inherited drives, we are bound to be enslaved to them. You know that old adage, what you resist persists? Right? This is our lizard legacy, our deepest part of the brain, right? Our lizard legacy for safety, sustenance, and sex, right? What you resist persists, but what you can honor, what you can be grateful for, can empower you. And this is where the emotional and the practical benefits of an evolutionary world come blazing into focus. Because we can have gratitude for what we've inherited for the first time. Because as I said before, if your ancestors didn't have these same instincts, you wouldn't even be alive. We can move beyond denial, guilt, and resentment. Healing, we can have compassion for self and others in ways that are very difficult without this understanding. Healing broken relationships becomes almost a no-brainer. And we can develop a witness capacity that isn't the same as a witness capacity of sitting on a cushion meditating. It's an evolutionary witness. It's a witness of understanding what's driving us and why, what's going on under the hood, as it were. So I suggested that there were 5 things that we now know about human nature, and I suggested that the 5th one was a little controversial, perhaps, and so let's take a look at the 5th. I suggested that our destiny, our natural destiny, is everlasting death. Now, Connie and I visit graveyards all the time. And the reason we do that is twofold. One is to remind ourselves of how fortunate, how blessed we are to simply be alive today. Because it wasn't too long ago that many women died in childbirth and many children died under the age of 5. And here's the thing. From the perspective, let's say this person right here, okay? From the perspective well, let me put it this way. Whatever this person's beliefs about what happens after death, to their soul or their spirit or their consciousness, that may have inspired them, that knows they had practical truth. They had a belief system that inspired them. Okay, that's cool, that's great, no problem. But from the perspective of every life form in the universe, this person is everlastingly dead. Everlastingly so. And we can now have we can embrace this and not fear this because we can see the gifts of chaos and death. And Moses didn't know this. God didn't reveal this to Jesus or Moses or Muhammad or the Apostle Paul or any of the prophets. This has been revealed through science. So let's take a quick look at death and chaos from what God's been revealing through evidence. Oh, this is to remind me